hello, welcome. My name is Shaina. I'm an astrologer, and today I really think I'm doing a very important video, okay? Maybe I've got a little too much self-importance here, but this is a video that I really don't feel like exists on the internet, which is crazy. Today I'm doing a video all about the most baseline questions when getting into astrology. Basically, what is astrology? What the hell even is astrology? How is it calculated? Where did it come from? What is it? Is it a science? Is it this? Is it that? All these kinds of questions I'm addressing today. If you know nothing about astrology, this is an amazing place for you to start. So before you click out of this video because you're an intermediate or advanced astrologer, I would recommend just waiting a little bit longer, because this is information that straight up most people that study astrology have no idea about, okay? Most people, when they learn astrology, they go straight into what a birth chart is, learning it, dissecting it, which, hello, I did too. That's why I'm making this video, because I'm literally speaking from direct experience. And it wasn't years later that I even knew how it was calculated, or what it even was, or where astrology even came from. It wasn't until years down the road that I started to look into that stuff. And it's not, straight up, it's not easy to find this information. A lot of this information I've almost compiled throughout my years of research, of books, of videos, and all that sort of stuff, because you can't all find this in the same place. And so I tried my best. I tried my very best, and I'm trying my very best to give you the most accurate, correct information. And if I'm not sure of something, I'm not saying it, but if I'm wrong at all, just please correct me in the comments. So if you're one of those people online that's like, astrology is so stupid, I hate that my girlfriend cares about it. Why does she care about this? Why does she think this is legitimate? Maybe this video will answer some of those questions. And at least I hope with everybody, you step away from this video having a little bit more of a respect for astrology, even if you don't like it, even if you don't follow it after this. And before we get any further into the video, let me just get some advertising out of the way. So I sell birth chart readings on my website, shainaemily.com. If you don't really care to learn about all this stuff, but you just want somebody to kind of know it all for you and do it all for you, I got that. I got that for you. I'm just kidding. You could just go to my website, shainaemily.com. I sell birth chart readings over there. I also have a personal Instagram, and I have an astrology TikTok. All right, so without any more of this introductory bullshit, let's just get into Learn Astrology 101. What is astrology? What the fuck is astrology even, right? So let's start at the very beginning. And yes, I'm going to use just some basic definitions here, but I'll go into what those definitions mean in layman's terms. I'm just trying to be as, I don't know what to call it, I guess factual as possible, right? Astrology is the study of movements and relative positions of celestial bodies, interpreted as having an influence on human affairs and the natural world. Basically, it's a range of divinatory practices. It is labeled as a pseudoscience. Now, this is a word that I've never used in my life. I've heard many people describe astrology as a pseudoscience. I never used it because I really never understood what that word meant. And to me, I used to be among the frame and mindset of, I really don't care if it's a science. I don't really care what it is. I like astrology, and it's what I do, and it's what I practice. I never put any stake on it needing some sort of label. But when I was doing my research for this video and, compiling my information, I accidentally quickly realized that I don't understand why astrology wouldn't be considered a science. And that sounds so weird for me to say because, again, I used to never give a shit. But after looking up what the definition of a science is and how astrology came to be, which I'll go into more, I don't understand how it's not anymore labeled as a science, especially when it used to be a science. It used to be a major part of arts and sciences. And when people studied the arts and sciences, most of the time, a big one that they studied was astrology. Let's go into the definition of what a pseudoscience is. So when you look online, every definition for a pseudoscience is honestly fucking rude. I don't know what their fucking problem is, but I'll just read it. I have two definitions here. So the first definition that I found is a collection of beliefs or practices mistakenly being regarded as based on the scientific method. The second definition I found is just as bad, if not worse, which is pseudoscience can also be the result of research that is based on faulty premises, a flawed experimental design, or bad data. So then I was like, wait, you're telling me that anytime an astrologer or anybody said that astrology is a pseudoscience, they're basically saying right there and then that astrology is fake, that astrology isn't real, it's based on all this bullshit, and they're basically admitting that they don't believe in it. And I was like, damn, I'm glad I never said that, because I obviously don't think that. And the more research I look into it, the more I don't get it. So let's go into what is a definition of the scientific method. So the scientific method is a method of procedure consisting in systematic observation, measurement and experiment, and the formulation, testing, and modification of hypotheses. Which literally sounds like astrology, okay? And I'll break into it more. But I mean, whether you want to say astrology is a science or not, because I guess it's just some big thing about whether it is or not, basically astrology is just, hey, we're looking at the sky, and I think that the sky affects what's going on down here. I think that there's something connected between the two. You know, that's also where as above, so below came from, which a lot of spiritual, metaphysical, woozy people say, and it's basically what's reflected above us is also reflected here on Earth. Now, even though I'm saying, like, I do believe astrology is a science, I don't care if you think it is or not, okay? I hope that I have a lot of skeptics watching this video, and so you can fight me in the comments. I'm really not that passionate about it. All I will say is that I think astrology is a field of study, specifically a field of metaphysical study, and astrology, I also think, is a language, right? You can't talk to me about astrology unless you know about it. It uses its own words, set of systems, beliefs, it uses its own vocabulary. So I think we can all agree that astrology is a field of study, and it also incorporates its own language. So now let's go into the origins of astrology. Where did it come from? Where did it start? All that sort of stuff. So astrology began in Mesopotamia. Basically, this is like modern day Iraq, also including a little bit of Syria. The first written evidence of astrology was in the 3rd millennium BCE, which is basically 2000 BCE. So like we're in year 2000 now. So this like 4,000 years ago is the first written evidence of astrology. Now, this is the first written evidence. Everybody definitely speculates that astrology was around much before then. It just hadn't been written about and all that sort of stuff. But that's where we can for sure know that it at the very latest it started here. So it's been around for a really long time. The general principle originally of astrology was that the messages of the gods were written out in the movements of the bodies in the heavens. And they basically started to think this because they realized that eclipses tended to occur around really big events. They'd go, wow, that's crazy. We just had this really weird eclipse. I don't know if they had the word for eclipse, but you know, the sky went black or whatever happened. And the king died, like or a war was won, or a disease plagued the land all of a sudden, right? They realized that eclipses would line up with these big life events. And they started to go, huh, there might be something here. There might be more to something here. And to bring back the whole astrology, I think is actually a science thing, which I feel so annoying saying because I'm like, who cares? But people, whatever, it is. The first step of the scientific method is ask a question. So check, we've asked a question. Why does it keep happening that major events line up with eclipses and particular big events seem to take place when the eclipse happens in a specific part of the sky, right? Because they didn't just notice, oh, then eclipses happened, the king died. No, they noticed specifically when the eclipse happens in, let's say, like this quadrant of the sky over here, this is when something bad happens with the king. But when the eclipse happens over here, this always seems to be something good for the king. I'm just taking examples. A lot of the early astrology was all based around the king and royalty because that's what life was based around, and so that's what people had to care about. But obviously, more things would align with it. So astrologers and astronomers obviously used to be the same, right? Because astrologers and astronomers, which I guess I'll just call them astrologers, it's the same thing. They would go out and they started to study the sky. They would look up at the sky and plot where different constellations were, and then they would observe their life, observe what was happening around them, and kind of make notices, make connections, and then they would compare and contrast. Hey, other astrologer, I noticed that when the moon is in this part of the sky, oh my God, everybody's up and crazy. Everybody goes crazy. Everybody gets mad all the time. I don't know what's going on. Why is everyone so mad? And the other astrologer would go, oh my God, I noticed that too. Bitch, why is everybody on edge when the fucking moon is on this part of the sky? That must be when things get to be volatile, right? That would be like the moon is in Aries, right? So they started to be like, okay, when the moon is here, or when the moon looks like this happens, or this tends to occur, or this feeling tends to come up, whatever it might be. So what's the next step after asking a question in the scientific method? It's do background research. That sounds like what everybody's doing. They're starting to plot things, they're starting to make notes, they're starting to make connections, they're starting to see if there's some validity here, and then they're starting to what? Construct a hypothesis, the next step in the scientific method. And basically the hypothesis was, does what's happening in the sky affect us down here? Is it true? As above, so below. Is that true? That was the hypothesis that astrology is testing. So the next step is to test with experiment. So this is when ephemerides were created. So this is the first big sort of like astrology word that we're going to come into play. Ephemerides or ephemeris. Basically, astrologers started graphing the movements of the planets, as I mentioned, and they started to realize that it kind of has its own little system that they, oh, this takes 30 days to go here, and this takes this amount of days to do a full cycle, and then it comes back at the same spot, right? That's ephemerides. I actually have a book here that my lovely boyfriend got me, and this is because ephemerides or ephemeris still exist today. Basically, ephemerides is just a table giving the calculated positions of celestial objects at regular intervals throughout a period. Okay, so that's like what, right? A little bit. I'll show you in this book and it'll make sense. So I have my own little ephemerides book. So this is what they did before. You can just go online and look up a birth chart. You couldn't just have this book. To calculate your own chart, which is a whole separate thing in itself, you need a bunch of resources. But basically, ephemerides, like I have the 1997 one because my boyfriend was super sweet and he thought it would be cool if I had my own like year ephemerides, which it is, and he's right. Now, obviously, when ephemerides were first created, they did not have this book, but the idea is still the same. So you'll see here, it's really small print, but this is January 1997. You can see that it's a literal table. And so I would go down to the day, which is the 8th. That's my birthday. And then I would go along here and it marks, oh, the sun was at 18 degrees Capricorn this day. Mercury was at 4 degrees Capricorn this day. All that sort of stuff. And that's what ephemerides are, basically. The sun is going to be in this position at this day. The moon is going to be at this degree. Like this is where it's just tracking the planets. It's just a visual table and tracker of the planets. That's all ephemerides are. Like if you're more of an intermediate or advanced astrologer and you're looking at your year ahead and you're like trying to see when Jupiter changes sign and it goes into your 10th house because it moves into Aries. I'm just saying stuff, when you want to know, you're looking at the ephemerides. That's what you're checking because you're checking what day the planet goes into the sign that you're looking for. And so that's what the astrologers started to do. They started to track this stuff. And they started to basically test it with experiments. Now, this book, you can't have a book that says like every second of every day, blah, 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 blah. Like there's a lot of math involved in calculating your chart. So this just says all the times for noon. And so if you're, not born at noon, which most of us aren't, you have to do, there's some math involved. I forgot to put this in my notes, but actually the first ever computer was invented to calculate ephemerides. It was basically an astrological computer. That was the first thing that we cared about to make a computer off of was astrology. Obviously it was a very, rudimentary computer. It was kind of just like a, multiple wheels, and it was just an easier way so you didn't have to like have all these little things and have this like super crazy long book for every single moment in time and all of the planets. It was just kind of like this wheel system, and it was called an Antikythera machine. I'm probably butchering the shit out of the pronunciation, so here's what it's called. Antikythera, I don't know. Astrology spread after Mesopotamia, and it went to India, it went to the Greeks, it went to the Romans, all that sort of stuff, and a lot, I'll go into that more, and that's kind of how we have the different branches of astrology today, which I will talk about. But the ancient Greeks made this first mechanism just to kind of show the transits and ephemerides in advance, an easier way to calculate it. We still have like a piece of the ancient one or something right now, which is amazing, but it's basically the oldest known example of an analog computer. So what I'm trying to say is astrology has been something that people have been studying for just ages and ages. And it was something that scientists and mathematicians really used to respect and take into consideration. Kings would always have astrologers advising them. In fact, that's kind of what astrology started out as. It was just basically, like I said, the world revolved around the king. Nowadays, there are actually 4 branches of astrology, 4 traditional branches, which I'll talk about all of the other 3 later, but the first one, originally, there was only mundane astrology. We don't use mundane astrology as much anymore because I live in America, we don't have kings, and even in Britain they do have kings, but it's just, things are different now. And basically, mundane astrology is the branch of astrology dealing with politics, the government, and the laws governing a particular nation, state, or city. So basically, the king would ask his little astrological advisor on political moves, political advice, what might happen to me? Should I marry off my daughter to this girl? Should I make this law? Is this a good time to start a war? Is this, am I gonna die in the next eclipse? Or whatever it might be. And that was for a long time kind of all astrology was. It was what's kind of happening right now with the laws, the city, and the state, and let's like look up in the sky and observe kind of what's going on and kind of answer it down here. So the first recorded birth chart was actually not around until 410 BCE. So again, from 2000 BCE all the way back up until 410 BCE was when the first natal chart came into play. Maybe there was, people did it beforehand. Again, we only have, the written concrete evidence that survived. So maybe there was a person who was on this and was their own Nikola Tesla of the day of astrology and figured this out. But the first recorded one is 410 BCE. And basically what I'm trying to say here is astrology is and always will be a study where you go out and observe someone or something and then draw conclusions on your study based on your own and others around you experiences and or bias. So basically what I'm saying is what I've always been saying. If you do not have a bias in astrology, then what do you have? I'll say it again. If you do not have a bias in astrology, then what do you have? Astrology is all about having a bias, having a personal opinion, having a personal perspective about it. Because astrology does not have a Bible. Astrology has no holy book, right? We don't have some fancy-pantsy person that was brought to us from God, that says, this is Aries, and then when the moon is in Aries, this is what that means. No, we don't have that. It is definitely a belief system, but it will never be a religion, I think, because we don't have that, right? We don't have a set core of things that you have to do and rules and this or that. No, it's kind of create your own study in a lot of ways. Astrology would not exist if people weren't biased. Astrology wouldn't exist if people didn't say, hey, I've found this to be true and you do too. And we keep agreeing that when this happens in this part of the sky, this happens, right? So basically, the next step in the scientific method is this procedure working, right? Am I asking the same questions and am I getting proven correctly again and again? Like, is it true that when the moon is in this position of the sky, everybody's on edge because the moon is in Aries and everybody's all pissed off? It keeps on seeming to be that way, So basically, is the procedure working? Yeah, it was. People were seeing magnificent success with astrology. Astrologers were advising kings and getting things correct. People were taking life into their own hands and making much more strategic decisions. And then the last step in the scientific method is to communicate these results. And that's what people did. And that's what we're still doing to this day. That's what I'm doing. I communicate my results that I have found after observation and hypothesis and research and background and experimentation, all that sort of stuff. Then I share with you what I found from that, which How is that not the scientific method? Astrology just came from people, from real people, making observations and building on each other, correcting each other, and adding to each other. And if that's not a science, then what is? Nothing can be proven. Math can be proven. Math is proven time and time again that you take one thing, you take another thing, and then you have two things, right? You know, I can prove to you that I'm holding two things in my hand. 1, 2, right? Math is proven. Science, it can only be proven as far as the scientific method can take it, right? I know that we all like to say gravity exists, but gravity only exists because somebody discovered it. Somebody said, I'm going to call it the word gravity. I'm going to test this hypothesis and do the scientific method. And this is what I think is I think I'm going to call it gravity. I'm making this name. It could be called hubbubaloo, but I named it gravity. If science could be proven, then we wouldn't have people that think the earth is flat and people that think that the earth is round, right? Like, you can't go out in the world and say, I have 3 things in my hand, because everybody they just know you're wrong. You can't have a conversation. Whatever side of the argument you're on, you can have a conversation on why you think the earth is round and why you think the earth is flat, okay? And that's not what this video is about. I really don't care if the earth is round or flat. It really doesn't affect me any at all. You know, I'm gonna keep going on, but I would just like to bring back what the wise Trisha Paytas once said. Do we even need gravity?
Can we just also say we don't actually need gravity? What if it was never invented?
Is it even real? Like, is it even proven? What even is science anyways, right? It's all just kind of a metaphysical study.
Sir Isaac Newton perhaps first defined and discovered gravity.
What do you mean we don't need gravity?
Yeah, but if that's all we know, nobody would know any different.
I just feel like it's important to understand the world you live in, that you have to know what gravity is.
Okay, well, you should know Sutton Foster and you don't know her, so what?
You're right.
I truly think no wiser words have been spoken. No all-seeing great one came down and confirmed gravity. A human observed it happening and tried to draw conclusions on how and why it's happening, which is literally astrology. People kept on seeing events coincide with certain things happening in the sky, and they thought there must be something to this. There must be something to why a heavier object falls faster than a lighter object. There must be a reason why when the moon's here, everyone's fucking mad. You know? We can prove the theory of gravity, but we can't prove its existence. We can prove the theory of astrology, but we can't prove its existence. So how is astrology not a science? I don't get it. And again, I only thought this when I was researching the video. This video made me think this. Like, obviously you can add some stuff in the comments if you want. And I'm not trying to say that because I believe astrology is a science that you have to believe in it and everyone has to believe in it and then it is there for real. I'm saying quite the opposite of that. I'm saying because astrology is a science, you're welcome to believe in it or not. You're welcome to use it or not. You're welcome to even think it's real or not. Like I said, some people don't think the earth is round. So, and they're allowed to think that. You know, they are, right? But you really can't say that there's 3 things in my hand, right? There's 1, 2. So yeah, I promise this all isn't going to be about, you know, why astrology is a science. Let's move past this whole thing, you know, more about astrology. Basically, astrology, when you get down to it, all it is pattern recognition at its core. Pattern recognition. This pattern happens and then this result happens. This pattern equals this. When I see this pattern, it's this. And that's why I think autistic people would be and are great at astrology, because just like math is pattern recognition and science is pattern recognition, so is astrology. It wasn't until Christianity came into play and was trying to X out any other belief system, any other religion, any other explanation for life, that astrology got demoted and became a pseudoscience. So if you are somebody who is not Christian, not religious, and you're shouting out about how astrology is not a science, think about the fact that this is kind of what the Christians want you to say. This is what the Christians want you to think, right? So you saying that, especially if you're an atheist, you're really falling into their trap. I'm sorry. Okay. Woo! So now let's break down the 4 traditional branches of astrology, the 4 types of astrology. So we've already talked about mundane astrology, the original form of astrology, political astrology, dealing with the government and the laws of a particular nation, state, or city, right? The next kind of astrology is horary astrology. Again, this is one that's not as used as much nowadays. Definitely used more than mundane astrology, but used less than the other two. Horary astrology is basically a branch in which an astrologer attempts to answer a question by constructing a horoscope or a chart for the exact time at which the question was received and understood by the astrologer. So let's say my name's Margaret and I'm an astrologer, and Lucy comes to me and she says, I've been having this pain in my shoulder, because that's what horary astrology was mostly used for. It was actually mostly used by doctors. So I'm actually Dr. Margaret here. It was a lot of time used by doctors to diagnose ailments, but I don't know why we stopped using it for that, because it sounds like a great idea. But you know, you could say, oh, why is my shoulder hurting, Miss Margaret? Or Dr. Margaret, why is my shoulder hurting? Or you could say, Dr. Margaret, will I find love? Dr. Margaret, should I go for this job? And basically the astrologer would look up at the sky and say, hey God, it's me, Margaret. What is the answer to this question? This is the original praying. This is the original prayer, right? When Christians pray, they look up to the sky, they look up to the heavens, because that's where the answers are. You know, in astrology, it's not God that's up there, it's the sun. Where's the sun at right now? Where's the moon at right now? Where's Jupiter? Where's Uranus? Where's Venus? Where's Mars, right? Looking at the sky gives you your answers. So Christians basically took the astrological form of horary astrology and turned it into the concept of prayer. The third kind of astrology that we are all probably the most familiar, that you and I are probably the most interested in, is natal astrology. Okay, this is probably the most popular form of astrology today. This is your birth chart astrology. Basically, natal astrology says that by taking the exact date, time, and location of somebody's birth, you are able to shed light and interpret an individual's personality and psychology, or even potentially destiny, if that's what you believe. AKA, with natal astrology, you're able to answer the question, why are you the way you are? Or why am I the way I am? Or why is she the way she is? Or why is this family the way they are, right? That's natal astrology. Now, something that also blows people's minds when they're first finding out about astrology is this is not just for people. Everything has a birth chart, okay? Your house has a birth chart. When you moved into your house has a birth chart. And every object has a birth chart. Every animal has a birth chart. People ask me, like, does my dog have a birth chart? Absolutely. Your dog has a personality. Your dog was born. That moment that they were born is their chart. My dog, fucking exactly like her chart. She's an Aries moon, and like I said, she's pissed all the time. Always pissed. It's hilarious and it's cute. Every country that was founded has a birth chart. Every website has a birth chart. Speaking of, let's go into electional astrology, which is the fourth branch of astrology. Now that you know that everything has a birth chart, you might start to go, that's kind of a lot of power, right? It is. So does that mean that I can like create something and try to plan its birth chart, try to get favorable odds for it? Yes, absolutely. And I am crazy and do that all the time. And so basically you get to play God a little bit with that, which is why I think a lot of people don't like astrology, because it makes you very powerful. It makes you very aware, and you're able to kind of manipulate life, I think, a lot more than the average person. So basically, electional astrology is when a practitioner decides the most appropriate time for an event based on the astrological auspiciousness of that time. So then I was like, what the fuck is auspiciousness? Auspiciousness, the definition of it is the favorable quality of strongly indicating a successful result. So basically what that means is that you pick your chart. You know, auspiciousness would be like let's take my YouTube channel, for example. This YouTube channel, I did electional astrology and I picked this YouTube channel's birth chart. Exactly. I pressed create at the exact moment that I wanted. If you're curious, this is the birth chart that I chose. What's actually interesting is that I think it's really true, because I've noticed an influx of Taurus risings receiving and wanting birth charts from from me, which makes sense as I chose this channel to be a Taurus rising. Again, auspiciousness. This doesn't mean that Taurus rising is the best rising. I can make an argument that it's not, but I know in my chart what the degree that I chose for my Taurus rising is incredibly favorable in my chart. This degree of Taurus is so amazingly aspected for me, and it's in my 11th house. Now, if you don't know anything about astrology, you don't have to know about this, but I did this for my TikTok as well. That was the first thing I ever did with electional astrology, and my TikTok got 10,000 followers in 1 week. So I was very successful in that one. And what's crazy is we actually even have the first known electional chart that was created, and it was created for the country of Baghdad. I'll insert it here, and they chose it because Sagittarius was rising and Jupiter was in Sagittarius on the ascendant. So yeah, I mean, nobody else in their right mind would probably choose my chart for their channel, right? But this is more of the classic astrological auspiciousness that you would see, right? We know Sagittarius has a bunch of luck. Jupiter is lucky. It's in its home planet Sagittarius. We got luck, 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 luck. We want expansion. We want a successful country. So we're just going to Sagittarius the shit out of it. Right now, I can tell you that that's not really good long-term planning. However, there was an incredible amount of success in Baghdad in the arts and sciences. Philosophy, politics, all that stuff flourished so well for so long in Baghdad, which makes sense. That's very Sagittarian, right? Those are the 4 branches of astrology. And now let's go into, well, okay, I know all this stuff about where astrology came from and, you know, the branches and all this stuff, but like, how is it calculated, right? Like, how does this come to be? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. So this, I think, is when we all have to put on our thinking caps, right? This, to me, was the most daunting thing about this video, because you'd think, what do you mean how astrology is calculated? It's just the constellations. Oh no, you are widely mistaken. It is not just as simple as, oh, it's the constellations, or oh, it's where the constellations are. No, it's not. Yes, that obviously does come into play, but there are 2 major forms of astrology, or 2, I guess, major systems, or I don't know what to call them. 2 major types of astrology, and that is Western/tropical astrology, which I follow because I'm in the West, I'm in America. And then there's Eastern or Vedic or Hindu or sidereal astrology. It goes by all those names. So we'll call it tropical astrology, which is Western, and sidereal astrology, which is Hindu from India. So these 2 forms of astrology are basically, yes, they deal with the same zodiac signs and the same main concepts, and they're both ways to figure out why we are who we are, why we do the things we do, why this happens then, you know, our destiny. They both answer those questions. But the way that they calculate astrological positions, and kind of like I would say the goal or vibe of the 2 systems, are very different. You may be thinking, well, then doesn't that discredit astrology in itself? If there's different ways to calculate it, and I'm not even going to go into the house systems in this video. I'm going to do a whole different video about house systems, because even within Western and tropical astrology, there's multiple subsets, just like how I'm sure there is in Hindu astrology. I'm not going into that right now because that's, again, a whole separate video that I will do later. This is just tropical astrology, sidereal astrology right now, okay? So again, you may be thinking, how are these possible? Then one must be right and one must be wrong. And I say, well, you need to open up your mind a little bit more, because everything's perspective in this world. But also I saw this amazing quote, and this is a book that I'm going to be referencing for quite a bit of this video, so let me grab it. So this is a fantastic book, and this is a big reason why I know anything that I know right now, honestly, that I'm going to be talking to you about sidereal versus tropical astrology. I've pretty much found it in this book, and this is just an amazing book in general. This is Astrology, Evolution, and Revolution, A Path to Higher Consciousness Through Astrology. This is by Alan Oken. I'll show you this cover. This is a little bit more of a rare book. I got it used. You can see the cover's messed up. Now, this is only for advanced astrologers, okay? If all you know is this video, this is going to be over your head, but this is a fantastic, fantastic book. I cannot stress it enough. And basically, there's this amazing quote where the picture is the same, only the lenses are different. This is not a quote from Alan Oken. He quoted somebody else that said that to him, but I was like, that is it, right? So the picture is the same, right? So the person's the same. The idea is the same. It's just the lens that shows it a little bit different. But at the end of the day, a forest is a forest. You're still looking at a dog. You're still looking at a chair. You're still looking at a scary picture or a happy picture, right? It's just that the lens shows it through something a little bit different. But one is not right and one is not wrong. They're both valid pictures. It just depends on what you like. What kind of lighting do you take to? What kind of, filter do you take to? Do you want a wide angle lens or a narrow lens? I don't know everything about photography, but you get what I'm saying. There's also a quote that I think supports this even a little bit more. Basically, it says, just as the domestic cat differs in its physical and behavioral appearance depending on its country of origin, because remember, sidereal, India, tropical, Western, different origins of countries. So human, a much more complex creation, changes outward form and social structure depending on his race and physical location on the earth. AKA, this is why we can have two different forms of astrology and both be true, right? Somebody that lives in Syria is just as much of a human as I am, but the way that we live our life and how we see things and how we go about our days couldn't be more wildly different, but both are valid, both are true, right? Both are our realities. Just like how different regions of the earth have different core themes in their population's birth charts due to where they are located, astrology and the study of it also differs depending on where you are located and your reality there. For example, basically how it works in astrology is that depending where you are located in the region of the world, for example, the southern hemisphere, the northern hemisphere, closer to the equator, farther from the equator, that also affects the themes of birth charts, right? So just like how everybody in, let's say, Iceland kind of maybe acts a certain way or is exposed to certain things, their chart reflects that. They have different patterns and different probabilities of likelihood of having this rising or this placement or this than America, than does someplace closer to the equator, than does someplace farther from the equator, right? So just like how, depending on where you are in your country of origin, traditions differ, astrology will differ as well because perspectives are so different. Studies in general are so different. Different traditions and different cultures will of course show a different astrology because life is different there. So both are valid, all is true, and at the end of the day, like the quote says, the picture of the person or the event or the thing that you're gonna get is going to be the same. The themes are going to remain the same. You'll find that you guys get to the same conclusion. It's just kind of maybe the lens that you used or how you got there, or your mode of transportation, or who you took with you, or what I'm trying to say, how you calculated it. That's what's different, but the picture's all the same. So now let's go into Hindu / Vedic / sidereal / Eastern astrology. I just want to touch on this lightly, okay? I am a tropical astrologer. That is what I follow. That is what I know about. That is what I study. That is my area of expertise. Vedic sidereal astrology is not. However, I do understand how it's calculated, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. I guess what I want to preface this with is there are more restrictions or a little bit more of a wall or a barrier to break through if you're interested in sidereal astrology. A lot of people that study sidereal astrology believe that you have to be Hindu to study it, believe that that has to be a religion and that those two are one and the same. So I do not talk about Vedic astrology much at all, if at all, because of this, because people are very touchy about it. It's just how I'll leave it at, okay? This also will answer that big question of the 13th sign and all that sort of stuff. Many people think astrology started in India, and many people believe that sidereal astrology is the original or traditional astrology, and that is not true. It is somewhat slightly true, but it did not start in India. That is completely false. As I mentioned, it started in Mesopotamia. It branched out from there. Basically, astrology after Mesopotamia, it kind of traveled a few places and it wound up with the Greeks. The Greeks wound up taking it to India, and that is how sidereal astrology was created. Astrology was already very much up and around before it was taken to India. However, the reason why people call sidereal astrology the original astrology or think of it that way is because it's more traditional. It's basically frozen in time. Vedic astrology does not progress forward like Western or tropical astrology astrology does. The easiest way to show this is that there have been many new planetary discoveries since the formation of Vedic astrology. We have very recently discovered Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These 3 planets are not taken into consideration in Vedic astrology. Neither are all the new asteroids, neither are all the new celestial bodies. None of that stuff counts, okay? Basically, Vedic astrology says these are the planets that we knew were there when Vedic astrology was founded, and we do not take anything else. We have a bubble around it. It is protected and it stays as it is. Yes, it is closer to traditional astrology, but it is not traditional astrology because they took what the Mesopotamian people and the Greeks and all these other people had done with astrology and made their own system using that and then stuck it and kept it in place there. I don't know if this is, I guess I should say like 100% factual, but I've heard many astrologers say this, and I think it makes a lot of sense too, so I want to share it. But if this is not something that like Vedic astrology believes or it's like a permanent stamp thing, then it's not. But again, astrology is just your observations and biases, and I do see this as true. Vedic astrology is considered to be the male side of Mercury. And I think that makes a lot of sense. As we know, Mercury, well, I guess you might not know, Mercury is dual ruled. It's both feminine and masculine. Most planets, like the sun, is masculine, the moon is feminine. Mercury is one of the very few, if not the only, that is both feminine and masculine. Vedic astrology is considered to be the male side of Mercury. So it is, and basically what that means, it is much more concrete. It is much more set in stone. There is not room for interpretation as there is in tropical Western astrology. Like I said, it stayed in its place. With tropical astrology, I think you're supposed to have a bias. I think you're supposed to have your own opinion and add your own conclusions to things, add your own observations. That's how the practice grows. With Vedic astrology, it is not like that, okay? With Vedic astrology, if this is here, it means this. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no, oh, but it also might mean this. No, it just means this one thing. Period. And that's more of the masculine side of things. And obviously, that makes it really good for predictions because this is when it's going to happen. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So Vedic astrology is a lot, I think, is greatly used for if you want to predict things. If, this is not the kind of astrology I care about, but if you're somebody who's like, I want to predict the political election, I want to predict, when we're going to go to war, I want to predict this, I want to predict that, I think you would be better off using sidereal astrology. However, what sidereal astrology fails at is being psychological. It does not really answer that question that I want to know, which is why we are the way we are, why you are the way you are, why they are the way they are, right? It just more says, this is the family you were born into. This is what your interest will be. This is when you'll marry. This is, these kind of predictive things, rather than getting to the heart of you and going, this is why you want to marry. This is why you want to move here. These are the hobbies and activities you have a passion for, but instead you're forced to do this. That's not the kind of stuff that Vedic astrology will answer for you. Those kind of open-ended questions are what tropical astrology will answer for you. I'm honestly way too opinionated and I want things to grow and change with me. With new discoveries, I think that's so valid, right? I don't think things should be frozen in time, but to each their own. And so let's go into how is sidereal astrology calculated. So sidereal astrology is based on the fixed sidereal zodiac. Fixed, right? It makes sense because it's like a fixed system. So it's the fixed zodiac, also called the fixed zodiac of constellations. So Vedic astrology is actually the astrology that is based on where the constellations are. Okay? And a lot of times you'll hear Westerners be like, oh, it's where the constellations are. It's not. Nope. That's Vedic astrology. So again, this is the time where we have to get out our thinking caps a little bit, okay? Honestly, I never thought astrology was a science because I suck at science. I'm terrible at science. It is by far my worst subject in school. I never got a single C in my entire life, except on one progress report in 3rd grade science, and I will never get over that fucking C. So the Earth travels in an orbit around the sun, which is called the ecliptic. Okay, and I'm going to try to include visual representations here because I do not understand anything without visual representations. And basically, the ecliptic lies between a broad band of stars on either side of the orbital path. So the orbital path that the Earth is traveling in around the sun again, right? All of the planets of the solar system have their orbits completely within this orbital path, this large stellar boundary. Well, except for Pluto, but again, Pluto is not considered in Vedic astrology. Pluto has like a crazy ass ecliptic, which is why it is such a controversial planet in life as it is in astrology. You know, Pluto represents everything controversial, so that makes sense that its even status is controversial. So the sidereal zodiac is calculated based on the constellations, where those constellations are. These stars make up the 12 zodiacal constellations. This is what the Hindu call the fixed zodiac. So something to note is that if you look up your sidereal chart, depending on what year you were born, it will be between 19 to maybe around 23, even maybe 24-ish degrees different from your tropical chart. But you basically have to add a little bit more degrees as time progresses. So if you were born more recent, you're probably going to be more around 23 degrees different from your tropical chart. But if you're born much farther, you'll be like 19 or 20 degrees different. And the reason that the sidereal zodiac is about 19 to 23-ish degrees different from the tropical zodiac is because we have these two things, okay? We have the celestial equator, which is here, and we have the ecliptic, which is here. These two things are different, right? They're different circles because the Earth is naturally on a tilt. It's on an axis. So the equator, which is straight for Earth, is not actually what is the ecliptic, which is where everything travels, which is straight for that, right? They're two different points. This visual makes more sense than I can explain it. I'm trying, guys. I'm not a science girly here. There are 2 points where the ecliptic and the celestial equator coincide. The positions of these 2 equinoctial points are not fixed, but are slowly and constantly shifting in relation to the background of the fixed stars in the sidereal zodiac of constellations. Did I lose you? It's okay, we'll figure it out. This mutation occurs at the rate of about 1 degree in 72 years, right? This is why, since the sidereal zodiac has been founded, things have shifted about 23-ish degrees from that time, because it's been the passing of all those years. The direction of this change is retrograde, though. That's actually a common astrological term, retrograde. That just basically means that things appear to be moving backwards. So instead of your sidereal chart being 20 degrees above your tropical zodiac, it's behind it. It's actually lagging behind. Hopefully this graph will kind of explain it. So the sidereal zodiac adjusts backwards 50.3 inches of arc a year, which again relates to about 1 degree every 72 years. Sidereal astrology takes this shift into account. It needs to because it's talking about the constellations. Basically, the constellations aren't moving, but because everything is moving around it, it then affects these fixed constellations. So let's take an example. So my sun in tropical astrology is at 18 degrees Capricorn. You know, I call myself a Capricorn. However, in sidereal astrology, my sun is 24 degrees Sagittarius, which is 1 sign behind Capricorn, because the way in astrology works, Sagittarius is sign 9, Capricorn is sign 10, Aquarius is sign 11. So again, it's going retrograde. There are 30 degrees in each sign. Basically, they took 360 degrees because it's a circle. They divided it by 12 and they gave each constellation, each sign, exactly 30 degrees, 0 to 29 degrees. So when you do the math, 18 degrees Capricorn minus 23 degrees, because of the year I was born, that was the shift at that time, equals 24 degrees Sagittarius. So that is how the sidereal zodiac is calculated. Now let's go into tropical Western astrology. Tropical or Western astrology is obviously much more based in Western ideals, which are things like psychology, why we do what we do, why we are who we are, nature versus nurture, all that sort of stuff, all those concepts. It's not the best for predicting events because it less so says when an event will happen and more so says when you will be affected by something emotionally. So for example, let's take an example, right? You might be like, what does that even mean? Sometimes you can go through a really, really hard time, but because you're really busy or duty calls or you just have to keep moving, that's not really when you're actually emotionally feeling it, right? It's happening to you, but you're kind of just living on top of it. I'm sure we've all experienced this before. You don't really have time to process it. So an event like that, you might be confused because you look at your chart and you'll go, well, I'm looking at my progress chart, I look at my natal chart, I look at my transits, I look at this, I look at that, I look at my solar revolution, da-da-da. Nothing showed me that this would happen today. But maybe that's because that's not what you're doing today. Emotionally, psychologically, what you are doing today is going to work, is, dealing with clients or whatever it might be. So then let's say 6 months later, you have some time off. You have a vacation for the first time in a while. And we've all been through this before. It's like that major event that happened that you didn't deal with. It's time to process this, right? You start processing it. You start going through it emotionally. Well, I'll bet you when you check your tropical charts or whatever it might be, you'll see that it looks more like the event is happening then because you're going through it emotionally then. Now, obviously, sometimes when we go through something, very much aligns with when we're feeling it emotionally. So it's not like Western astrology is impossible to use as a prediction tool, but it's important to note that it more has to do with emotions. It more has to do with our psychology. It more has to do with the kind of inner workings of our mind and our emotions, which makes sense that Western astrology is considered to be the more feminine study, the more feminine side of Mercury. It is much more intuitive, right? There's much more room for new discoveries, new breakthroughs, new thoughts, changing, new things that come up. Girls love to gossip, right? This is my observation. Oh, this is my observation. This is what I think. This is what I think, right? That's very much Western astrology. It is much more nebulous, right? The feminine is very moon-like. It's up for personal interpretation. It will grow and change with the times rather than despite them. That's kind of my big thing about sidereal astrology, is that despite all these new advancements, despite all these new discoveries, we don't want to hear it. La 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 la. We're going to pretend that it's not there because we want things to remain the same. Men, right? No, I'm just kidding. It just depends on where your taste is. If you hate Shakespeare like me because you think it's old and outdated and needs a little refresh and you're tired of hearing the same stupid stories and the same dumb iambic pentameter that makes it sound like a little kid is singing along and then you don't even know what's going on, right? If you're over that, Western astrology is definitely more of your thing. Okay, if you think Shakespeare needs a little bit of a refresh, so do I. That's why I like tropical astrology. The tropical zodiac was standardized in ancient Babylonia. That's basically right around where Mesopotamia used to be. So it's around the same region that it was kind of standardized. So technically it wasn't even Western astrology. It's just the form that we, as people of the West, like the US, use. So it's more like called tropical astrology. Now, how is the tropical zodiac calculated, right? If the sidereal zodiac goes based off of the constellations, then what the heck is the tropical zodiac using? Well, think of the word tropical. Okay, what's tropical? The equator, right? The equator is where it's tropical. And the equator and the ecliptic are basically the two backbones for how to calculate tropical astrology. Tropical astrology is based on what's called the movable zodiac of signs. Vedic is more fixed in its nature, in its study. So it's the fixed zodiac of constellations because it's the constellations that we're focusing on. Whereas tropical, it's more movable. It goes with the flow. It's ebbs and it flows. So it's the movable zodiac of signs, because this is not based on the constellations. So basically the tropical zodiac is calculated using only the equinoxes and the solstices. What is an equinox? An equinox happens twice a year when the sun crosses the celestial equator. Again, remember how I said we have the equator, we have the ecliptic, and there are those 2 points on either side where they cross? Well, those 2 crossing points is what the entire tropical zodiac is based off of. When the equinoxes happen, because the equator and the ecliptic are aligned, this is when the days and the nights are equal length. And the point at which these cross is called the vernal crossing. So again, what is the celestial equator? It is the projection into space of the Earth's equator. It's equidistant from the celestial poles, which is you have the North Pole on top, the South Pole on bottom, and the exact in-between line is the celestial equator, and then that's projected into space, okay? Then we have the ecliptic line. Again, this is that big circle that is the apparent path of the sun among the constellations in the course of the year. When the ecliptic line and the celestial equator cross, this is an equinox, okay? These 2 equinoxes are the points that the tropical zodiac is then projected onto and split evenly through. So for example, the vernal crossing represents 0 degrees Aries. This is the exact day that there is much sunlight as there is moonlight, okay? The days are split evenly in half. And this represents the spring equinox. 0 degrees Aries starts off the spring. 0 degrees Aries starts off the astrological calendar. And then if you look on the other point of the vernal crossing, you'll see 0 degrees Libra. This is the autumn equinox. This is also the other point when the days are equal to the nights. If you know astrology, you know that sign 1 is Aries and sign 7 is Libra. Libra is the sign that splits the zodiac in half. That's why it's the scales. It's trying to be even, right? And then what they did was they took all that other space and split it evenly amongst the other 10 signs. So you have 360 degrees of a circle, and you split that evenly into 12 parts, where 0 degrees Aries is the spring equinox, 0 degrees Libra is the autumn equinox, and you have 30 degrees of the rest of the signs going through that. That is the tropical zodiac. The summer solstice happens at 0 degrees Cancer, right? That's the other cardinal sign in astrology, which if you don't know, you know, that's fine. And then the other end of it is the winter solstice, which is at 0 degrees Capricorn, okay? 0 degrees Cancer is in the middle of summer. This is when the days are the longest and the nights are the shortest. 0 degrees Capricorn is in the dead of winter. These are when the nights are longest and the days are shortest, okay? Astrology is incredibly intuitive. So just knowing that in itself, you understand Aries is the first sign in the zodiac. It has everything to do with I am the first, right? That's its quality. Libra splits everything in the middle. Libra's all about balance. You have Cancer, which is the longest days. Cancer is considered a very lovely, warm, sweet energy, childlike. What do we do in summer? But we act very childlike. And then we have Capricorn, the darkest time of the year. Capricorn's, I mean, come on, I'm a Capricorn. It's super depressing. It's super dismal. It's super negative. Cancer is a much more optimistic, positive sign, wants to see good and enjoyable things. It wants to see the daytime. Capricorn is the nighttime. It's bitter. The astrology is so intuitive. Everything is a reflection of what it is. So basically, to summarize it, sidereal is constellation-based, tropical is equinox-based. It makes sense as to why the tropical zodiac kind of came to be first, because when you were to look up at the sky and you were to see that, oh, the sun's all the way at this furthest point here, and it's Capricorn season, and the sun is at its lowest point, because that's where the sun is in Capricorn. It's at its lowest point. It's its dimmest. It's its darkest, right? When you look up at the sky and say, hey, this planet is here in the sky, and this relates to this, that is tropical astrology. Astrology was actually also originally used as a farming calendar. I mean, Doesn't that make sense? If we're basing this off of the equinoxes and the ecliptic and the equator and all that sort of stuff, and how long are the days and how long are the nights, and oh, Capricorn is when the world is barren and there's no fruit, and then Cancer is when the world is super, fertile, and, Cancer is the mom and it's very fertile and it has a kid, and that's when the world is fertile. And it makes sense. Astrology was originally used as a farming calendar. Not to sound crazy, but I would love to create my own calendar based on astrology and the equinoxes and the solstices. I just think it would be much more aligned with the way the world works, instead of starting Aries in the middle of April out of nowhere. It's like, that's when you need to be starting things anew. That's when you need to be looking at a fresh start. Why do you think we have the concept of spring cleaning? When we're getting rid of the old and bringing in the new, it's because it's starting Aries season. We're starting the zodiacal calendar over. Why do we create goals during the new year? But because of Capricorn season. Capricorn season is all about goals. The new year in our Christian calendar starts in Capricorn season, or in the middle-ish of Capricorn season. And that's when we're starting our new goals. That's when we're setting goals for the year, right? Because the tropical zodiac is equated with the equinoxes, this is why the tropical zodiac does not need to move. It does not need to account for the shifting of the constellations, because it has nothing to do with the constellations. Yes, the 12 signs of the zodiac are taken from those 12 constellations, but that is not where they find their math to calculate your chart. When the sun is in Aries in the tropical astrology, that does not mean the sun is in that constellation. What it means is that the sun is at a certain point in the sky in comparison to us. So this is something else that I stole. I'm pretty sure I stole this from Alyssa Sharp. She said it years ago, but I've always kept it in the back of my mind because I thought it was really smart. She said, tropical astrology takes us to the sky, whereas Vedic astrology takes the sky to us. Okay, so that's why tropical astrology is much more person-based, because it is taking me up there. It's much more approachable. It's much more who we are, how we relate, what we do, right? Whereas Vedic astrology is taking the sky to us. It's much more out there. It's much more predictive. It's much more, oh, this is how the world affects us. Instead of tropical astrology, this is how we affect the world, right? And I think that all has to just do with the way that we're raised culturally. America is a much more me first, me based society. India is a much more spiritual, we, us, how it affects us based society. Okay, so hopefully we understand a little bit more of how the tropical zodiac is calculated and the sidereal zodiac is calculated. Now, which one you want to study, that is entirely up to you. While I've been explaining them, you probably have one that you are like immediately biased towards. So it just is your preference. It is completely your preference. So now let's go into the origin of the 12 zodiac signs. So I'm not going to go into this in depth because basically each sign has its own origin, and that would be a video in itself. But in Greek, zodiac means circle of animals, which makes sense because there's 11 animal glyphs and one inanimate object glyph, which is Libra. The zodiac gained popularity and structure and use in the Roman era. Most of the symbols and symbology comes from Babylonian god names or Greek words. They all come from one of the two or both, or they're from a root of this or that. That's where all the words come from. And all the symbolism and all the stuff comes from various myths and stories. Again, it's just after doing the scientific method many times, realizing that when the moon is here, everyone's fucking pissed off at everyone. And so Aries represents the ram, and it represents Mars because it's angry. And we found all these associations and all that sort of stuff. Can you believe it? I'm at the end of this video. Oh, hi! And my little doggy wants to say hello. Okay, so this is my little girl Pixie. We're both Cancer risings. That's why we're so cute. Yes, that is. She's a bold little girl. She's a double Aries. Oh, she does what she wants when she wants. So the last thing that I will kind of add to the end here before I go, is just a list of every single astrological concept there is to learn. Now, I tried to make this as extensive as possible. I hopefully included everything. If I forgot something, I'm so sorry, and you can add it in the bottom. But here is, if you want to screenshot this, this is every single astrological concept. My goal is to go through all of them, to make a video about all of them. Lord knows if I'll actually do it, but I'm going to try. I'm sure this was a way longer video than I wanted it to be. So if you sat through it, that's fucking awesome. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully it helped you out. Thank you so much for watching. And if you would like your own birth chart reading from me, I do sell them on my website, shainaemily.com. I also have an astrology TikTok and I have a personal Instagram. But thank you so much for watching. Again, check out the how to look up a birth chart video, which is coming next. And yeah, all right, bye.